welcome to our seminar for this Human Factors and Ergonomics in Patient Safety Working Group. This working group is funded by the National Institute for Health and Care Research, and it has been established to support researchers working in the patient safety space and specifically working in the 6 patient safety research collaborations around the country that are collectively known as SafetyNet. We're looking to support them to use human factors and ergonomics in their research, whether it's that they're already doing it and want to be able to share that knowledge or wanting to learn more about how to use human factors and ergonomics in research. We've established this working group to help bring like-minded people together. And whilst we're primarily set up to support those researchers, we welcome anybody interested in human factors in patient safety. And so it's really lovely to see that we've got expanding membership, and we're seeing some practitioners join us and lots of different people wanting to be part of the conversation, which is really brilliant. Today, we're going to be hearing from Laura Pickup, who's a chartered human factors specialist working within a healthcare trust. We're going to hear from her about her experience of how she's found implementing human factors in her trust. This seminar came out of discussions that we had at our in-person event in July earlier this year. There were lots of conversations about how people were doing human factors in practice, trying to use different methods and apply the principles, but weren't necessarily talking about how they were using human factors up front. And we had this idea that people were doing human factors by stealth. And we thought that was something we wanted to explore more and help people think about how they can think about how they're using human factors and maybe talking about it in different ways to get different people on board initially. We're looking forward to hearing from Laura about her experience of implementing human factors in a healthcare trust. Over to you, Laura. Thank you very much.
I've got some slides and I will start sharing in a minute if that's okay. But I just wanted to give a little bit of background because I think when we talked about this, Brooke, and when I also met Brooke and Adam in Dublin at the HEPS conference, what kept coming out is like you say, how different people are doing human factors and how sometimes that can put you in a space as a professional who wants to do the best you can and represent your profession in the best way possible in a sort of position where do you just get on and do something? And do you find a way of bringing it in, or do you stick to your guns and go for sort of, I don't know, what we would be proud of and share with our professionals and even publish at a later date sort of thing. And it's not saying you can't do both. I think it's just saying there's a little bit of a tension between those things. So those are sort of some of the conversations. Just as a backstory, really, because of why I've actually done some new slides, and why I've done them as I've done is because it comes from a little bit of my background of where I've sort of progressed from human factors. So I originally was a clinician many years ago, and then have done 25 years in human factors, and then working in other industries, mainly transport and rail. So when I came back into healthcare, trying to bring human factors in, I came in with an idea. Now, bearing in mind, my first post, or why I got into ergonomics and human factors, without trying to bore you too much, was with Sue Hignett, Professor Sue Hignett, who was already had a post as an ergonomist in a hospital. So that was in the early 2000s, late 1990s. Oh, ouch, old age creeps in. So I'd watched Sue, I suppose, get her foot in the door, and I suppose I became part of that team. And at the time, you don't realise what you're learning, do you? Because I hadn't done human factors, but I look back on that time, and Sue and I have had conversations about it. When I came back to healthcare from rail and transport, I was tasked with, well, how do I bring human factors in? And the ask was, mainly from clinicians, can you come and tell us what other industries do and just come and showcase what it looks like? And so that's what I started to do. And I thought, oh, it's an evidence-based area, so I'll bring all the evidence. You know, they'll love a bit of evidence, and you know, really bombarded sort of my presentations of going, well, we should be looking at design, and here's the evidence of why it's a cost-effective thing to do and why it's better for safety. I'm not going to lie, I don't feel it went very well. I mean, I got so far, but it didn't stick and it didn't last, and it was sort of all a bit opportunistic, as we know. So I then went into the field of implementation science for a period of time, because I took a post up, because I thought, well, maybe I need to learn just a little bit more about what that field's got to share with us. And the reason I share that is because some of my reflections, or the way I'm going to talk about what I've been doing and what I've been looking at, is really just reflections, and I hope they are not just ramblings of a mad woman. There is some generally sort of some sort of plan in my head of like how we need to actually reflect on what we achieve. And the reason I mention implementation science is because I do think, again, there's potentially overlap, I think with our field. But again, there's a real seek to understand how things work and how you get sustainability and how you get spread. And I actually think we do try and do that in human factors, but I really think as a healthcare human factors body and group that we probably need to be starting to think about it and really start to put it down a little bit more, make it a little bit more tangible. I'm not going to have all the answers here at all. I'm not going to propose that I do, but I'm more than happy to share my reflections if you're willing to accept the ramblings, as I say, of a mad woman. But let me just share some slides just to keep me on track, and so it's less rambling and more sharing. But then also, this is relatively brief, and what I was hoping as well, it sort of just leads to more conversation and discussion, really, because I think that's sort of the main thing. I haven't branded it because I'm not here to say, well, this is the way to do it and this is Bristol's way of doing it, but that's what down the line, I think it would be lovely for us to be able to come together and say this is a way of doing human factors, and integration is that key term. When I was employed in the trust, I was fortunate enough to be brought in by a chief nurse, so sat at the exec level. And she has a good understanding of human factors, the one we would recognise, and was keen to have a post and have this built up. She unfortunately isn't in that post any longer, and that's the start of a journey for me as well, where I am at the moment. We probably, like many organisations, are becoming a group, so we are merging two organisations together. So where I started in the last 3 years and how I've moved and tried to integrate human factors is currently in a state of let's do it again, or what does this look like now? So I will talk about what I've done, and I don't know what it's going to look like in a year at this moment in time, but I am fortunate enough to be in the position, having been brought in, I think, by a chief nurse, to be in that position to even be in those discussions now. So I feel that's a win. That's really positive. Where I get to, I don't know. What we achieve, I'm not sure. So this is the journey so far. SSS, so we talked about stealth, but I got to thinking about it, and I think there are a couple more S's that I feel on reflection I've relied upon. I know I haven't got to convince all of you as an audience, and this is a HEP slide, so this is a regurg slide for that Carlos and Brooke, that human factors integration is something that is being called for. Having human factors in healthcare has been said now for 20 plus years. Fran will be going, yes, I know. So what I've started the job and the role, in fact, I used the slide, the image here as part of my interview process to say, it's not to justify that isn't human factors a good idea. I don't believe that was the starting place, and I was fortunate enough that it didn't have to be the starting place, and I'm not sure it should be the starting place anymore, because we've got plenty of evidence to say it's a good idea. 2024, as you can see, the WHO Global Patient Safety report also came out saying that actually we need efforts to strengthen human factors integration. And it's this term that I think we need to be moving to, and probably being a little bit louder about human factors integration. Because only with integration, when you look at other industries and how they have human factors and how they're being regulated on it and how it sits in an organizational structure, it's only through having work to get it integrated into that organizational structure and in that body that it's probably been sustainable, and it's met sort of it's reached the level of regulation and it's checked upon, so it's there to stay, one likes to think. We don't have a human factors integration plan, strategy, vision for healthcare at the moment. I think that's probably what's missing. If you look to military, there you'll find standards about this is what human factors integration, this is what we mean by that term. So I think this is my personal opinion, we need to probably start putting some meat on the bones with that. And the way I started that was saying, okay, well, here's the Keele Centre. I spoke with them and they've kindly allowed us to use this image because this comes from that work. And I think that's where you're going, isn't it, Fran? I'm just thinking, Fran, that's where you're heading to. Keele, am I right?
Hill University, so a different
Kill,
Kill.
different area, of course, because he's private. But Kill, if you look at the Kill stuff, there's some really interesting stuff in there. But this is their integration or maturity, human factors maturity scale. And so I've been using this to put the meat on the bones, really, to what integration is, to say that if you're level 1, this is what it looked like, level 2, level 3, and then therefore what I'm trying to do at the moment is build the evidence base of what we're doing, aligning it to this maturity framework to try and say, well, this is what level 2 looks like, and here's the evidence that we've got it. So it's quite a nice benchmarking thing. I'm trying to use it as an approach to say, well, this is how we can map complex sort of interventions and integration of human factors. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's the right way, but it's sometimes you just need something, don't you, to start hanging the evidence upon. And I'm finding this quite useful to communicate with. How have we actually been doing that? So as I said, I think there is definitely the S, there's the stealth, there's the guerrilla human factors on the ground, how we get it in. And I think we've relied on that and probably got so far with that. And I'll come on to what I think that's looked like for me. But I think there's 2 other S's that I truly believe with my reflections. And when I say reflections, through the implementation science word, what I learned a little bit about was the realist review approach. And that's sort of what's in my head when I'm looking at some of this. I'm not going to claim this is a method that I'm using, but I am thinking it's a way to be able to reflect and understand the how. And out of that, I've sort of pulled, actually, no, I've also had a strategic approach, which, as I say, I brought in really very early on, and actually probably asked the organization to commit to before I took the job, and that was part of my interview process. I very much brought that to the table. There would be a strategy, and this is sort of how it would be framed. So before I even was employed. And then the last one is serendipity. I don't think I can lie that some of this is absolutely down to just good luck and good fortune. And it's like, how do you recognize when that's coming? How do you recognize when you're in the presence of it? And how do you manage to make and optimize that, really? So these are my 3 S's at the moment. This is what I'm sort of my reflections have been. I'll start with stealth, and I will just go through them briefly because I'm sure you'll recognize them. So I haven't really focused on the what I've done, and I am more than happy to share some of the examples of what sometime if that's more helpful. So I hope this is helpful. But really, it's about the introductions and my intention. I think that's very much when I came in, when I would call it stealth, but I took a long time. I was part-time, so it was over a period of 6 months really to try and do some listening and learning, walking into the organisation. I was fortunate enough to, when I asked for it, to have meetings and to speak with all of those who were influential in the organisation at the higher levels of those organisational things, the ones who were setting the organisational strategy. Most of them said yes. There were only a couple that were really hard to get to, and I actually still got them in the end, but it just took a little bit longer to get to some people than others. That's interesting in itself. So that tells you quite a lot. Who wants to speak? Who wants to hear quicker? And where have you got more work to do? That's all I would say. That. So the other thing I was really seeking to understand is who has the voice in that organization in the areas that we would be looking to influence. So who is it who's making those decisions? And then also, it's like which organizational portfolio, I suppose, has the biggest impact in terms of the organizational priorities. And that might be anything from, well, who's got the biggest risk on the risk register at the moment? Who's got the biggest need for financial input? Or who's got the stickiest problem that the organization was wrestling at the moment? And just trying to really fully understand the headaches in the organization at the time, and those that are in those positions are having to manage those and deal with those. It's like, well, what do we have to offer, to give, to support, even if not directly, but under the radar in some ways, as we've already said. So it's trying to sort of know where you're going to target and where you're going to focus, and also really learning how to get stuff done. Again, how do you escalate? How do you get things done? And I still learning, absolutely still learning. And those people who have been in the NHS a lot longer will know a lot more than I do. How do you surround yourself by people who do know how to get things done? Or how do you find the people who are higher up that can help you get things done? And how do you get the input that you've provided noticed? And now that sort of becomes down to a personality thing. It makes me feel sometimes a little bit uncomfortable. It's not really a show off, but at the bottom here, it is a show and tell in an appropriate context and in an appropriate way. And what I mean by that is if you go into great depth at that meeting that is at a really high level, it probably won't go anywhere. It's sometimes about just really following leads in terms of the way that other people are packaging information, and then we have to follow suit. Even though we might want to be able to show, look at the evidence behind all of this, we might not have that opportunity. So it's how do you contribute, I suppose, to other teams, and how do you find your tribe is the other thing I've described here. I think there are people strategically placed in healthcare that absolutely get human factors. So one example is systems engineering is not a new concept to people who are in clinical engineering or who are in procurement areas. They might not call it the same thing we do, but they definitely have gone through an engineering program of work, so they get systems engineering, and if that's what we're trying to influence in trying to get human factors into it, they will probably understand it. IPC, infection protection control, they absolutely get hierarchies of controls and more influence on design. So again, they're sort of an open door to push on. And again, there's some very tangible healthcare problems that we can probably help. The risk team have been my friends, absolutely. Just by fortuitous, I suppose, really, they sit in a similar office to us. But again, they speak the same language. If you're starting to say, well, what strength of controls do we have? How do we mitigate this? We can't do it all. They will absolutely talk the language. And I feel that they have absolutely welcomed the evidence that we can provide from a human factors perspective, plus the way that we look at analysing some of their data from a more systems perspective. And maybe it's just individuals, I don't know, but I do think sort of that risk knowledge really plays a part. You may find health and safety might be your friend. I know, as I say, when I started with Sue, that's where we sat in occupational health and the health and safety side of things. And so maybe that was a stronger thing. Our organisation, the way it's organised, I'm not sure what everyone else's is like, but there's silos to stuff, isn't there? Why we don't just call it safety, I don't know, but patient safety sits there, staff safety sits there. That's a challenge for us, I think, as human factors professionals who are always really looking for both those things. But you're not going to change the world. We're not going to change those silos overnight, but you can, as an individual, cross those and find sort of individuals and bring your own sort of tribe together, if you like, those that's new. I will say there's some emerging new ones that I think, again, by stealth, just by chance, I was looking at using Copilot and trying to be positive in terms of the information governance perspective, and having gone through doing the digital toolkit that we have to do if you provide services to the NHS as a company. I have a consultancy. I was beginning to feel the pain that the NHS must be having, and the information governance teams, how they must be having that. So I sort of reached out to say, look, I want to use AI, I want to be safe, I want to be able to put some instant data through it. What does that look like? So we did all that. But by doing that, I actually ended up talking to someone in the digital team who's like, oh my goodness, I am terrified about this. Human factors is essential in this. And now I have a connection quite high up in the organisation. And he's really keen to see what we've done. So that's the stealth bit. Sometimes just talking to people and branching out, you never know where it's going to go. And I do believe that that's going to lead to further things. So I suppose, there's other ways of doing stealth and one stream of work in particular where just subtly getting a few questions into the Pulse survey, quarterly survey, which was proposed by then one of my tribal colleagues in wellbeing. Well, you could put those questions in there. Can we? Are we allowed to do that? Well, we can. We just get a bit of sign off. So there were sort of relatively discreet questions that have actually now become a risk on the register, because we knew what they would lead to. But I think you get a no in one area. I just conscious about what's saying here, but you might get a no to, could I do a survey to look at staff fatigue, for example? No, might be the answer. Could we put a few questions in that pull out perhaps about fatigue or well-being or workplace settings or stuff in this survey, existing survey? Yes, of course. Very quickly, 2-3 questions give you a huge raft of data that actually really starts to get your opportunity really to put it on a risk register. So I think there's more than one way to do it, and I think strategic interrogation is the other thing I've put up here. I haven't got that on my slide. I've just realized that's what I've put in my notes. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is being at the table. First, you've got to be invited to the table. And I think that's why making those relationships higher up in the organization. Once you're invited to the table, you don't even have to educate or teach. I think you can just ask a question that makes everyone go, oh. So have we thought about the change in that process with regard to the impact further down the line in terms of the physical resource and space that that's going to require? Have we thought about the, simulating it from an emergency resilience perspective? Have we got in there a shift pattern that's going to accommodate people's well-being, as well as delivering on the efficiencies that we want to see? That absolutely is what we're discussing here today at the table. You might not always get the answer you want. It might not even go anywhere. But the point is, the question has been raised and it's out there, and it's, and then you raise it somewhere else. And I think that's the stealth element, really, which sounds really, I'm conscious with stealth potentially sounds a bit devious. And I hope that isn't what comes across, but it is about introducing concepts that actually currently aren't considered and aren't weighed up in decision making, perhaps in healthcare. And I think sometimes our role is just raising the question to see where you get, and you'll get buy-in, I usually find, from someone. But the other thing is things like, a digital system that's being bought in. Have we considered what impact this is going to have on the cognitive workload? How changing this task from a paper to digital system, what does that do? And again, sometimes that takes a bit of explaining, and that's why I find that you get the opportunity, if someone does actually ask you to explain it, you get the opportunity to explain what you actually mean, and it usually leads to more work. That's the only thing I would say. So sometimes that stealth, just you've got to be ready. You've got to be ready that it's going to lead to, because you can't then say no. You're going to have to find a way of accommodating. So then managing that capacity is tricky. Show and tell, loud and proud. It's not. I struggle with that one a bit naturally, but that's a personality thing, I think, more than anything. But I do think if you're going to show and tell, you've got to be able to pitch it at different levels. I mean, that probably sounds really obvious, but you can be loud and proud and keep it very brief, I think, at a high level. I think the other thing is I've had the opportunity to be invited to board. I've been invited to the non-exec board, and we do something called a staff story, and got asked to do that. And again, it was another opportunity just to sort of tell how other industries integrate this. And NEDs, I think the non-executive roles, let's not forget them. They are very influential, and they are made up of people that will possibly recognize what you're talking about because they come from other industries. And so far, yeah, I've had people who are in the aviation industry, who've perhaps been in the energy sector, and they absolutely get what you're saying. So again, that's sort of stealth, but again, it's just having those opportunities, isn't it? But then again, as I say, there are ways that you do things, and you just have to justify afterwards and explain afterwards how that was human factors. You might actually literally have to point out the obvious. Yes, I know it's not just about me. That's not just me coming to the table. It's the fact that actually this is our profession, this is our science, this is what this brings to the area. And the last statement is, I've sort of got a catchphrase for each of these, is, the perfection is the enemy of the good. I think that's right. I think stealth, if you're going to go by stealth, and these aren't my words, these are catchphrases from others, obviously, you've got to be prepared to compromise as a practitioner. And that's not always easy for everyone to do. And I think it's not always easy to do professionally, because we, of course, want to see our profession represented to the highest level. So anything you see of my work, don't judge me too harshly. That's all I'm going to say. Okay. Strategy. So as I said, trying to bring to the table from the very start that you are going to have a strategy to integrate human factors. It's not just going to be by stealth and opportunistic. That's not going to work for your organization. They're not going to get the bang for their buck, and they're not going to get the most for their money if they're employing you as that professional. And that's probably the biggest thing I need to say when you come into the organizations about saying, really. But learning from other industries, again, is, like I said, when I first came back, that's what I was asked to do. And then I feel like it backfired a little bit, because everyone got a little bit fed up of hearing about other industries. But then equally, I do still use it to try and articulate what I mean. So you might say, I think we need an integration strategy, and here's one that another industry does, and this is what it looks like. That can give you more buy-in. So I don't think it's just about saying, look at all these other industries, aren't they better than us, and look what they do. I think it's about using those other industries to try and message really what you're trying. Well, maybe it's just me, but what I'm trying to articulate sometimes just needs a little bit more, I think, to actually make it tangible and practical about what it actually looks like. For me, as I say, I think an HFI strategy is essential. It's trying to get the organisation to own it. It took 6 months really to build it, and the first one I put out I did just for 3 years. We're just coming into the 3rd year now. But what I wanted to try and do is structure the target and the capacity that I had, which was limited me for 3 days initially. So it's not a lot, but actually trying to put those priorities into my time into things that I'd already heard that the organisation was challenged by, or were concerning them, or where sort of the money really was. And that sounds dreadful, but actually I would suggest that's sort of quite a lot of the time a big priority for any organisation, of course. So if you can do that, and what that also does is when you start to deliver on something that I think helps someone else get their message across, or help someone else escalate perhaps the need for more resources to look at the problem, then I think what you become is an enabler. So you enable with evidence a little bit more about what is required or why it should be considered as a safety issue, and hopefully it just helps someone else to do that really. And I do continue to refer to human factors as a support act. As I say to team members, you know, we are those ones I believe are in the background. I'm happy to stand up and talk about it if that's what's needed, but actually a lot of the time I think we are the supporters, and I think that's right. But I think also as well about understanding and being really clear. What I was trying to say is it's not about just creating this huge human factors machine. It's about saying what we're going to do with the integration is we're going to just build it into existing processes. So what are the existing processes that you've already got a workforce in there? So how do we bring human factors in? So eventually you can step away a little bit and your human factors footprint is still there in that area, and you're still back over here to give support as required. That's how I see, I suppose, integration really. We all know to change culture, it's the processes we've got to change, you know, and the sustainability of anything is only as good as I say, in terms of what you create really in those structures. So for me, the breadth of the system is important, and understanding what that looks like, and the early stealth work definitely, or the early stealth activities, helped support really the identification really of the priorities, and therefore it's potentially, I would argue, a little bit easier to demonstrate impact because you're seen as part of maybe a team, but who are solving one of the trust's higher priorities. Does that make sense? I think it gets attention, but it also gives you the opportunity to educate. I think it was essential in the strategy that I had some very senior people supporting me. As I say, I had the chief nurse, I had and still have a very experienced associate director of patient safety who knows the organisation very well. And I think it's enabled me to develop that network of champions. Now that sounds really informal, and that's one way of doing it, absolutely. The employment of Camilla Rowland, who was already in the trust, had been in the organisation 14 years, had been doing human factors by stealth, but in a corner in the organisation, and having her now as part of the team absolutely gives us that intelligence, you know, the how to, who's the person, who knows that. So I think it's that complement. If you're going to build a human factors faculty or a team, it's complementing it with, yes, expertise, absolutely. She's got a master's in human factors. I wouldn't want someone who didn't have, do you know what I mean, that sound knowledge base, but she brings more than that. You know, she brings the organisational intelligence. So it's so important really. So those champions at all levels of the organisation are absolutely critical, and setting clear objectives of what you're trying to do really. And I think also knowing where human factors becomes misunderstood. I'm not going to lie, there are pockets still, and very senior people who, you know, I'm speaking to when that's not my view of human factors, which I understand. And that's what I said to them. I absolutely understand it's not your view of human factors, but we need to work on that. You know, it's about, you know, really being tolerant that maybe we haven't communicated, or healthcare has seen just one aspect of it really. So I think, yeah, strategy for me is important, getting it on the organisational radar, even if they don't want you to report on it, report on it. that's what I've been doing. And now I'm in theory on the register to do an annual report on it. I mean, you set yourself up for more work, but I think, you know, we have to do that really. So the strategy I have is about breadth and it's about depth in certain areas. It's definitely about building capacity. And so that more formal development of a network is in the form of our human factors champion. What I wasn't keen to do, and I do think in a way there is an ask sometimes to do this, is spend most of your time educating. And we know that that has a role, but I didn't want all of our workload time to be taken up with that. So we tried to do a structured approach to that. We now have an accredited human factors introductory course that we run over a 12-week period of time, but we stress that this is about taking divisional people who want to build up their human factors expertise so that we've got a spread of a network of human factors champions that we know have had a 12-week episodes of human factors, 1 hour, 1.25 hours now a week, that we judge at the end with a case study, and it's accredited, as I say. So we try to build it that way rather than just say sort of no. So my strategy, it is about hearts and minds. It is about strategy in terms of being strategic where you want to place it, but you are trying to win hearts and minds. And then finally, yeah, let's not forget serendipity. I cannot pretend for one moment that everything that has happened and has gone well and has gone good was planned. And I think really looking at how some people have managed sort of small changes, and it's usually good people. There are, you know, I've been so fortuitous really to have and work with some really, really good people in certainly in the patient safety team, but wider than that, people that are just desperate to hear more. And I think we've been very, very lucky in that, and that led to a few things that we realised that actually writing policies and procedures was causing a challenge, and we were like, oh well, there's an opportunity to embed human factors in it. A day course on writing procedures informed by human factors, and every time it's full. So you realise there's a gap in the organisation in terms of, and I would imagine we'd find this across all of healthcare. I ask the first question I ask every time, who's had any education on writing procedures? No one ever has. So, you know, that we can fill some of these gaps, I think, from a human factors perspective. And I think you become very useful to people, and then they send more people. So I think there's other things that there are teams, you know, that again, fortuitously. So something like the blood transfusion team, if you look at their information, they're a really good organization for championing human factors, doing human factors and having human factors. So again, you just find people really that I think just can absolutely talk the same language really. But yeah, most recently, the one person, so you just find people in your organization. The most recent person we found was a performance data analyzer who responded to something because he was interested. And then we found out he'd actually done a master's that had whole modules in human factors. His thesis was on auditory quality of auditory alarms for medical alarms, and had worked with Judy Edworthy. I had no idea we had someone like this in the organisation. So there are people, I think, that we just casually and opportunistically find. So I'm building that network as well. Casual corridor conversations, your manager talks to another manager, you find out there's a new build about to happen, and you know, before you know it, you can absolutely get in there and have influence. Well, we think we are. I'll let you know in a couple of years' time whether we've actually had influence, but we feel better that we're in at the beginning. And then there's misfortune. There's incidents that happen that come across, you know, we come across, and you might be involved in reviewing incident investigations. I do mentor and support the investigators, and then sometimes by misfortune we can see that actually we can pull out streams that are really not being recognised in the organisation. And one example is that equipment and procurement. This snowballed, and we were already looking at that area, so triangulation of these things just came together and gave us the momentum that the organisation has now prioritised it. We've got Camilla as joint lead in the whole project. It's an organisational level. There's resource to it. Plan, probably not a fortune, good fortune, or, for a number of things coming together. Senior champions, they come and go, don't they? So we have to be ready for that. We have to be agile. You can't just rely on one. We have to be ready to convince the next one. And I suppose that's where I'm at now in terms of the senior champion landscape's changing hugely. So, that's okay. Wake up, time to wake up again and be ready. But I think that's, again, we have to sell that message from a human factors practitioner. It can't just be, oh dear, that's that then. It has to be, that actually has to be our agility. That has to be what we can do. We have to be ready to move and adjust and adapt. And maybe you move in the organization, I don't know, maybe your projects change. And as I say, the non-executive appointments, make sure you make friends with them and know who they are, because absolutely they are rich with information and very high up. So have impact and influence, really. So my key message is there: right time, right place. What can I say? That's about about it, really. I'll stop sharing in a minute, but I've got questions still, questions I'm still trying to answer right now, in terms of trying to give information and provide information to the board and say, where should we sit as human factors professionals in this team, in this structure, in the structure that we're really looking at now? How best can we demonstrate the integration of human factors? How can we capture that? I think that's for us, for a profession. What does that look like? I've got a way. I'm not saying it's the best way, but I don't know how far it'll go. And how many do we need in any one organisation? Again, being asked for that at the moment. And I've had thoughts in certain key areas of the organisation, which I truly believe they need a human factors practitioner themselves. Digital is obviously the one that jumps to mind. But how many do we need? I'll stop sharing so I can stop talking, and I really welcome thoughts, questions, just a chat, really.
Thank you very much, Laura. Absolutely magnificent. Thank you. And I've got a few questions, but I'm going to open the floor first. If anybody's got questions, please do. Fran's right in there. She's been hovering. Off you go, Fran.
This is probably something that Laura and I will have talked about over the years, but firstly, so much of what you said resonated.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So for anyone out there, what Laura has said, having been a human factors specialist in an NHS trust for a long time, I was nodding away. So thank you, Laura, for sharing those really great insights. Now, I'm really mindful that you are incredibly lucky in your trust. The trust is incredibly lucky to have you, because you're a qualified HF specialist. You also found Camilla, who was just an absolute brilliant find within the organisation. I know we have Evie on the call, who is one of 2 human factors specialists in Nottingham. And we know that there is a real shortage of human factors specialists within healthcare.
Yeah.
For anybody who's on the call who is thinking, that's brilliant, I want to get started, but I am not a human factors specialist, but I have an interest in human factors. I just wondered if you could share your thoughts and advice about how those sort of enthusiastic people who really want to grow human factors, but perhaps don't have that sort of academic qualification or those experiences working in human factors, what steps can they make? Can they go along the same sorts of lines? Should they do something different? And what sort of impact do you think that they could and should be making?
I think it's working out what your strength is. So the strength there is the organizational intelligence. You know how to get things done. So in some ways, flying a human factors expert in will give you something, but actually having organizational intelligence and insight, you could argue there's pros and cons. Do you want me to both, really? I'm very keen of the grow your own model. I feel like that's exactly what we're trying to do. You can't just rely on having one person. People do come and go. So I think if you are in that position, then it's not grow your own, but you are growing yourself. And I think maybe it is about recognizing an organization. I truly believe there are so many roles that are funded in an organizational structure. So it's not necessarily always about finding new money. I wonder whether it's about reconfiguring some of the money and giving the opportunity to certain individuals to build themselves up in that team. I think working towards technical membership would be probably the minimum that I would suggest in that situation, because I think someone's got to do it in the organization. Maybe that's you, maybe that's someone else, I don't know. But I do think having someone at least working towards a technical membership would allow you to reach out and find a mentor. It might not be in your organization, but like I said, I'm still finding people. So there will be people in organizations who have done even a module of human factors who will talk the same language. And I think mentoring's tricky though, isn't it, Fran? Because I know a few of us, I know it's like, well, I feel like I'm probably at capacity in terms of who I can mentor, and I feel like I'm mentoring in my organization, but that's what you're getting. We're going to end up with 4 or 5 technical members, 2 chartered members in a relatively short period of time, I think. does the organisation recognise that? Not yet, you know, the value of that, but then could you plant these people in different teams? I think that's the power. So it is having a model of growing your own. How do you continue to grow and not just rely on one person? So yeah, for me, it's tech membership. I don't know what you think though. I mean, would you do it differently?
I do agree that it's really great to have that. So working towards technical membership for those people that are really interested, I think is a great way to just get that sort of credibility.
Yeah.
You know, there are lots of people who've got little bits or lots of knowledge in human factors, but it's such a broad science.
Yeah.
That it's impossible to be an expert
Exactly.
in everything.
Yeah.
And you know, when someone says they've done a bit of human factors, have they done a day, have they done a module, have they done an MSc? I do think one of the other benefits of working towards technical membership is that you get that mentoring, but then you also become part of the broader human factors community.
Yeah, yeah.
And one of the things I really liked that you really brought out, you know, you've been in another industry and you've brought that with you. And whilst you don't always want to say, well, in rail we did this, or say that rail did it better, you know, I have experience in automotive and nuclear before I came to healthcare. And, you know, there were some bits that maybe they did better, some bits that maybe they didn't. But I would always strongly recommend anybody who is, you know, grown from within in healthcare is to go and look at other industries, to go and speak to other people. And I think by, you know, perhaps being a member of the Chartered Institute, working towards technical membership, you're exposed to that much broader knowledge, which I think is really essential. Important for healthcare.
And the area that I think that I've already mentioned, but what you're describing there would be amazing. You could have several people working to technical membership, but like you say, maybe they're not going to become the broad GP of human factors and have that breadth. That doesn't stop you developing your expertise. So I'm thinking of digital again. Grow your own, someone who's interested, perhaps some course, perhaps some mentoring, go for tech membership, but with a digital focus even. So maybe you don't want to become a human factors professional, that's fine. But at least then your team has got a resource, you know, that has got a credible human factors sort of background. And then maybe you do it in improvement. And then maybe you do it in, I don't know, a particular divisional level sort of thing. So you don't have to be overwhelmed, I think, like you say, of going, oh, God, do I need a master's before I do any of this? No, it's about understanding what's most useful, I think, for the organisation. So yeah, no, I think we need to think about that more. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I think that's a really interesting point as well. So I'm thinking about how this working group that we've brought together is it started off as thinking about patient safety researchers, healthcare researchers, and it has grown to welcome anybody interested in human factors in patient safety and healthcare broadly. But I think throughout your presentation, I was thinking about how do we help this apply to research as well? And actually, I think that's a really good point, that you can do human factors in research without doing all of human factors. You can look at particular elements of it and think about how you draw different bits out. And as an early career researcher, your advice about finding the right people, and they might be in different pockets and they might call it different names, I take as incredibly useful to think about if you want to work with a trust to be doing research in human factors, how you connect the dots for them. And actually, I've got a question on that, which is right at the beginning, as you talked about implementation science. I thought that's funny because I've done the opposite. My career started with implementation science and quality improvement. I didn't actually know it was called implementation science until quite a while later. I heard a presentation and went, hang on, that's what I used to do. And then discovered human factors and I'm now passionate about that. How important do you think it is that we call it human factors? Because I see it overlap. It is multidisciplinary. It's transdisciplinary. How important is it that we either up front or once we've done it and said, by the way, this is it, versus having the right impact? Do we have to call it human factors, or is it more about having the right impact?
Really tricky, because and I felt like I wrestled with that a lot. I was 2 years in a university in the implementation science team, and they were lovely. So, but I felt I was constantly wrestling with, well, we do that. Well, we take the system, the damn Schroeder model. Do you know what I mean? It's like, well, actually, you look at it from a SEEP's perspective, you could probably, come up with that. So I think you're right. I think there was a challenge because I sat in a place with a title, with a name and representing the group. I then used everything I still had and called the implementation science, which was probably wrong, and I probably got it all wrong, if I'm honest. Does it matter? I think so. I've long enough in the tooth to know when we were not a chartered profession, and why, and the people who were involved in, so John Wilson, obviously I worked for at the time, were keen to make it a chartered profession. It's a chartered profession because it's unique. That's what it had to meet the royal approval of. It has to be unique set of, do you know what I mean, skills or set of science that is pulled together. So I suppose I still defend and would protect that because I think that's right. I think we got that chartered status because of that reason, and I think that's right. Is there overlaps? Yes. Do I think we should learn and come together? Yes, I do completely agree. I think the knowledge brokering stuff, I think actually the understanding how and why we do things, we don't spend our time too much looking at. So I do think it is a separate field, if I'm honest. So I suppose what I would like it to see, as I would with improvement science, if we're calling it improvement science, is how you get this blended approach. I'm fortunate that I'm now working with people who are in the improvement team who are really keen to talk about that. And they're coming on our course, and then we're working on projects, and then we're trying to go, well, how do we not wrestle anymore? How does it become this is a blended approach, really? So I think probably keeping it in terms of the title, but calling it a blended or some combined of science and knowledge is probably my preference. But you put me on the spot there, Brooke, so I might have to think about that one. But others, what do others think?
It is. I put you on the spot, but it's something I said to a few people when I was doing my masters and I was working in a quality improvement role, but doing a master's in human factors. I had frequent meetings with my line manager going, I'm having a real crisis of, I don't know what my identity is.
Yeah.
And
I was the
trying
same.
to work it out. So yeah.
But sorry, Fran, I think Fran's new role, I don't know what you're going to look at and what, but I think in a way, I mean, that's the world, it's knowledge brokering, I think it's called, that really traditionally sits in implementation science. But again, I think these are concepts that we should be using the evidence base that has been built by implementation science to inform our profession. We use psychology, we use engineering, why not use anything else? Sorry, Fran, you go.
No, I was just going to come in there. So yeah, I'm a knowledge mobilisation fellow at Keele University now, and I mean, I don't quite know what I'm going to be doing yet because I'm only a week and a half in. But yeah, that's all about taking academic research and trying to, translate that into workable things that can be implemented, useful things that can be implemented in the messy realities of healthcare. And it's one of those roles where nowhere in the job description did it say ergonomics and human factors, yet when you look through it, anyone who is a human factors specialist will be able to see all of the opportunities where we can use human factors. We might do it in a slightly different way to somebody else coming in and doing that role, and that's okay. That's what makes it brilliant. And that's where I think I can learn lots from all of the other knowledge implementation fellows. And hopefully I can teach them a little bit about human factors, and they can teach me about what their main speciality is.
And I just seen Yogini come in, and I think Yogini, I think I've seen your paper because it does interest me, and I think I'm not up for wrestling or anything like that with any discipline. Do you know what I mean? I think there's enough going on, but I think you're right. I think there's 3 of us here in a very small group, and obviously Yogini as well, by the looks of things, that have looked at or been involved in or done work in the field of implementation science. That's enough in a way to say, yes, we absolutely should be looking at, and I know Janet Anderson brought it up as well when we were at the HEPS conference. So yeah, I think it's definitely an area to look at what we should be doing with that. But yeah, good chat. Thanks, Eugenie, for that paper.
Marvellous. Has anybody else got any questions for Laura or for the group as a general discussion?
Has anyone got any answers to my questions? Those three, come on. They weren't difficult questions, were they? How many should we have? Where should they sit in the organisation? It's like, I don't know.
Go on, Fran.
Well,
Fran's going to answer all your questions.
Yeah, I know. I'm ready. I've got my pen.
I wish I did have
ready.
all the answers. And people ask me those questions, particularly where should they sit? And I've wrestled with this question like you have for a long time, Laura. And I remember, nearly 6 years ago, going to America to the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society Healthcare Symposium in Chicago, and there was a question there to the audience. The human factor specialists in this room, we all had to sort of line up and have the microphone and say what our job title was and which department in our hospital we worked in. And I was really hoping, maybe in America they've nailed it, they've got that sorted. And actually, no. Just like in the UK, there were ergonomists, there were ergonomics engineers, human factors specialists, all sorts of titles sitting in all sorts of different places. And I know that I myself have sat in many different departments. And I think sometimes, that is reflective or indicative of what your role is. So for a while I sat in occupational health, and that was great in a sense because I was doing very much physical ergonomics, and that was my remit. Did I want to do more? Yes, but I was very mindful that I was a specialist within the trust. And something that you've said, Laura, is you have to think about your capacity. And there is a real danger in sort of promoting yourself but then not being able to take on that work. That's almost more dangerous than not sort of promoting yourself at all. Steve Tipper, who is a human factors specialist who used to be in a neighbouring trust to me, had a completely different area of human factors that he was working on. And we always used to say that we could sit in the same trust, be in our respective departments and never compete for work. So I think sometimes where you sit is led really by your remit of work. That does restrict you in some respects, but equally it does contain and put sides onto what you're trying to do. I think the number you have, I don't think anyone's got it right. I mean, I think two is probably the max that we've got in a trust, which we think that's really good. But I think, Laura, you've talked about maybe you could have somebody in digital, you could always have somebody in procurement, you could have somebody in so many different departments dotted around. That would be the ideal. Would it ever happen? Probably not. So I don't know the answer to the ideal number. Maybe Evie has that answer.
Yes, Evie's going.
Come on, Evie.
Yes, thank you. So just to build on what Fran and Laura said, so I think, Laura, your point about how many do we need, where do they need to sit, actually ties to your concept of serendipity. If we're in if we're in that place, then sort of the work comes. And I think more is better. Realistically, I don't know where we're going to get more from, but that's where I think it builds on your comments about homegrown. So I mean, we have now someone in pharmacy doing a master's in human factors. They've come to us for mentoring. It started off with a project, and that seems to have a long-term plan, growth, and it's in a department that we didn't like. We've had 1 or 2 projects over a couple of years, but it would be better to have closer access. So sort of how can we grow in the different silos without overextending ourselves? So
I think growing your own is the way, probably is the way to go. It gives, but also it gives career opportunities to people in an organization, and it gives you don't have to build up that organizational knowledge as well. Do you know what I mean? I think I mean there's pros and cons of both, and I can say that because I suppose I'm a newbie coming in rather than but the ones that I look at, they know the organization, and if we can teach them the knowledge, then growing our own, to me, I mean, with Camilla, it was fortuitous really, because just how it works money and stuff like that. it was an opportunity to keep her. If she'd done the masters in human factors, then wasn't going to use it. This is the problem. If we fund people or support people, we've got to use them, and they've got to be recognized as being used. Otherwise, why are we wasting our money on training, educating sort of staff? So I do think growing your own is probably quite a good way to go, because like you say, they're not out there really. We also know that the capacity to find human factors experts and professionals is not there. So actually a more sustainable model is that. But right now I am spending my time looking at organograms and optimizing organograms and trying to find a way of, you know, what that could look like. And there is no more money. So it is, to me, about well, actually there's not any more money, there's even less money. So it's just like, how do you make a convincing case to have more human factors, but within the boundaries of.
So what's worked quite well in our trust is our human factors fellows that come from predominantly the critical care department.
Right.
And the head of department was so happy, he's given us another one who are working on maternity projects. He was like, no, brilliant. I like your approach.
Yeah.
Love your method.
Fellows is a good way.
Please bring the fellows up to speed to, you know, have these elements in their improvement project. So I think when it tied to, you know, how important is it that we call it human factors, I think we need to differentiate ourselves so we don't get designed out of a system that's trying to cut down costs.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, what makes us so great is the collaboration and the fact that we draw on all of these different specialties and we work well with others. So
I agree, and that's how Camilla started as a fellow, and we had to use that money to become. But we want to go back to that model. I think the fellow role is a really good one, isn't it? But it is time. This is the other thing. It does take from your time to mentor and to support and make sure it's still true to what's being delivered, isn't it? But yeah. So no easy answers, Brooke. No, that was an answer. You see?
No. Well, and actually, that is part of our remit with this group, is to uncover these questions so that we can think about what research we can be doing to answer some of them. And I know, again, coming out of our in-person event in July, the question of evaluation and how do we demonstrate impact was one that Adam and I have discussed about how we can use this group collectively to set up some research to understand that.
I'd welcome that. So, and that was one of the things I was going to say. I haven't gone into my structure and what I'm trying to do. And I know that Julia and Evie are doing something as well. I would absolutely welcome some research in that area. And I think that's where it's easier. So I'm conscious of time, but Fran, you say, you know, when you've got a boundary around in musculoskeletal, when we were in SUS, we could measure musculoskeletal injuries, we could measure rate, we could measure intervention. When you're talking about integration of human factors and the impact it's having on organs, you know, it has to look different, but you're right, there's different ways of evaluating it. So yeah, Brooke, look forward to that and happy to have further conversations. So
no promises, but
no. But this has been, thank you for inviting me, as I was saying, having the opportunity to you made me think, putting those slides together, it made me reflect and think. So thank you. It's my CPD.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody for joining us for this session. We will share the recording out with Laura. I presume you're happy for us to share your slides. We'll share them.
Yeah, they're not random, so.
And our next seminar is on the 27th of November, which is going to look at how we can consider equity and inequalities for safety from a human factors lens as well. So hopefully you can join us for that. But thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Lovely to see you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.